Welcome to the Kind Leader Podcast, where empathy meets action in the world of leadership. Your host, Gino Degregori, engages with innovators and seasoned professionals from diverse sectors, all demonstrating the power of leading with kindness. And now, your host, Gino Degregori.
Welcome to the Kind Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Gino Degregori. Today, we have the honor of welcoming Andrea Wanerstrand to our podcast. Andrea is the founder and CEO of 𝘁𝗵𝗶𝗀, a leadership coach with over 20 years of experience working with companies like Microsoft and LinkedIn. She's a Harvard McLean Fellow and former ICF Global Board member. So, Andrea, could you please share with our audience a bit about yourself and your background, please?
Sure. I have been in the leadership development space for about 20 years. I did have a prior experience in IT program management and working in telecommunications for a decade or so before that. So I had a big switch in my career when I was working for 𝗁𝗵𝗶𝘀, where I was running a ERP implementation, and my client was the VP of HR. She took me aside one day and she goes, "Look, you're really good at your job, but there's just something that lights up with you when you talk about the people component here." And she brought me on board to become her director of org effectiveness. Again, like a huge switch for me. And it was around then that I felt like, oh, if I'm going to be working in the HR space, I should get to know a little bit more about HR. And I started my coach journey. So I had this large career shift that's actually brought me here to the conversations I'm having with you over the last 20 years. And it really comes down to a passion that I had a mentor look at me and see that I really had an interest in people and how we work together and how we can all be human together.
That's amazing. So welcome to the podcast, and thank you very much for being our guest here. Phenomenal background, and congratulations on all your success there. So the first question that I like to ask my guest is, what does being a kind leader mean to you?
Well, being kind and being nice as a leader may seem similar, but they really are different as far as intent, impact, and approach. And I think a kind leader has an intent to focus on the long-term well-being. And kindness really comes from a genuine place when they're being kind, of care and respect. But they also have an approach of prioritizing honesty, constructive feedback, support. They address difficult issues with empathy and fairness. And if it's uncomfortable in the short term, they do that with care, but they also know that being uncomfortable can foster growth. They encourage trust and accountability. And most of all, they make people feel valued because the leader balances that compassion with boundaries and integrity. So while it's nice to be nice, it's better to be kind.
Absolutely. I like how you were saying it's kind versus, but it's not just nice, right? This kind of has so much more, and there's a broader expectation or how you work and collaborate with others. So do you have an example of that you've experienced in your successful career with, you had a leader that changed your perspective in how you lead with empathy and as a kind leader?
Yeah. I've had the honor and the stress of running performance review programs for two major corporations. And this is where being kind as a leader really comes into play. And before I worked at 𝘁𝗵𝗶𝗀, where I got brought in to be the director of org effectiveness, I really hadn't worked in large corporations. I'd worked for startups. So negotiating and navigating and this concept 20 years ago of emotional intelligence, of understanding other people's perspectives and needs, was not something that was being taught yet from a leadership development perspective. And I primarily worked with IT professionals and was about the data and the facts, and we dive right in. And that shift into leadership development was a new way of communicating and talking for me. And they were very kind in pointing out my growth opportunities and what strengths I had. And they provided me opportunity and mentoring. And sometimes it was hard to hear, but they were able to show me how what they were doing was something that was going to resonate in what I was asking people to do as people leaders in the performance programs that I was running at the companies in my career. So we can be nice and not tell anyone the direct truth of the feedback in a timely fashion. But when it comes to those big career moments, we've done them a disservice. We haven't been kind to them by not giving them the compassion, yet the accountability. And that's what that mentor did for me, is they gave me the accountability of how I needed to show up and how I could tweak things to do that in a way that was much more in alignment with where I had my goals and how I wanted to show up in the world.
Yep. Thank you for sharing that. And as you were talking, one of the things that kept popping up is like, especially performance reviews. It's such most people or companies have it like once a year or once a quarter, right? Depending where they are. But everybody's afraid coming into it. Afraid is such a strong word, but I think there's a hesitation going into because nobody wants to highlight some of the deficiencies or some of the areas of improvement, because the perception of, if I tell them that, then they're going to think I'm mean. But at the end, like you're saying, you're doing a disservice to that individual, to the organization, right? Not allowing them to truly get the feedback so they can become a better person. They can become a better employee, and not necessarily just on their skill sets, but also on the personality-wise too, right? People need to look at, because there's multiple areas when it comes to that. And one of the things I was thinking is like, I don't know why I would, but when it comes to people, when it comes to leadership, there's no like formula, like 1 + 1 = 2. It seems to me it's more of a chemistry kind of scenario, meaning like it's very complicated, meaning like not everybody is going to be the same way, and nobody is the same. We're all unique in our own ways. And how do you approach leadership and being kind? You also need to understand where the other person is coming from. So when you're providing that feedback, you need to understand a little bit of their background maybe, or just a little bit more about them, so you can resonate and not come across as just something negative. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And my professional and personal opinion is the performance review should have no surprises. Anything that you're bringing up as far as feedback in that performance review should have been something that you've already talked about. A kind leader is going to put it on the moment that the feedback needs to be delivered, rather than saving it up for a report, if you will, and the write-up for the review. Now, it still might show up there, but they might not give, they might see an employee do something that is just a little off, and then they need to get curious and observe. And if they see a little pattern, then they need to have that conversation going, look, I've noticed the last few times in interacting in such and such meeting that you're not speaking up, right? It could be, you're not showing your point of view, and you get curious, what's going on there? So the apprehension that people feel that you talk about, in the performance review, we build upon ourselves by simply not having those accountability conversations based on observation and curiosity, and able to help people way before the formality that large corporations and many companies do, and rightfully so. We have to make sure we're all meeting our goals and that we're contributing to the business and why we've been hired. But the surprise factor, the angst factor, I just don't want to give them bad news factor should just become a discussion about, here's everything we talked about, here's where you're really excelling, and here's the areas of opportunity, and we've already talked about how you could do this, here's some other things that we could do, and getting them excited to grow is where, if you really want to shift the angst moment of performance reviews, is by having it become a non-event except for the formality that your organization is requiring from you.
That's critical, and that's key right there, what you just said, right? It's shifting that from a formality every year, every quarter, to it's just part of what you do almost on a daily basis or a weekly basis, right? Connecting with your peer, connecting with your boss, or or your subordinates, and incorporate it as part of, whether it's good feedback or improvement, right? Opportunities to improve is what I say, right? It needs to be part and infused. And it takes, it's part of the culture that I'm seeing, right? It definitely starts, at the leadership level, because some organizations are pretty closed off and like, you don't talk about that until, performance review, right? But as we're seeing the shift in a new way of leading, like with kindness, it definitely starts from a mindset perspective and build it up as part of your organizational culture, right? I'm a big fan of the CEO of Microsoft, right? Like I love his book and his mindset, right? What he was able to incorporate in his organization with the growth mindset. And I've had other Microsoft employees in my podcast, and they talk about that because it's infused in everything that they, at least at the beginning, right? And then throughout, I don't know the different dynamics, but do you mind expanding a little bit on that from a mindset or specifically growth mindset, and how does that help an organization to lead with kindness?
So, as you know, in my career, I had the privilege of being at Microsoft during the change. And when 𝘁𝗂, and the change being in leadership and the approach, and 𝘁𝗂 has been many times quoted in the aspect of we went from a know-it-all to a learn-it-all culture. And 𝘁𝗂's book was preceded by bringing in Carol Dweck on mindset. He brought an outside in, which was critical at the time because 𝘁𝗂 had been there for many years. So otherwise it would have been an insider voice saying we need to do something different. So here we brought in Carol Dweck, who's, she's helped the UN have more of a growth mindset. So you're bringing in a world expert there. And it was moving from transactional to relationship to getting curious about if this doesn't work, what else could, or how else could it be applied? And that took multiple pulse points over the years where they infused it into what's called the Microsoft core of how they think about how they show up both with each other in the company and with their customers. So having that impact of moving towards that growth mindset, which is what are the possibilities rather than the limitations, or the arrogance of the know-it-all. If you go back, there was old Bill Gates commercials, I think, against him and Apple, and they showed Apple looking fresh, if I remember. Now I'm aging myself. But the concept of the growth mindset is that we might not get it right the first time, but something good might be able to come out of it, and that good is the learning. And this goes right into the feedback aspect as well, in the giving feedback in a timely manner based in curiosity and observation to find out what's really going on, what's at the heart of it for the other individual, is going to provide more learning and growth opportunity. And this is universal. It's Microsoft is a global company, and it applies in all the 100 and some odd countries that they have employees in, because people are universal. We have emotions and we do things great, and sometimes we fail. That's a part of the human condition.
Yeah. No, beautiful. And then that's, one other question I think we had when we spoke briefly before this call. One of my interests is, looking at culture specifically from a kind leadership perspective and how it is interpreted or handled globally. You being in organizations that are in multiple countries, one of the things that intrigued me is like, how do, you just said it also, as you were explaining the impact of growth mindset globally, because we're all humans at the end of the day, all of us, right? Different languages, different cultures, but how you've been able to successfully incorporate a kind of that growth mindset or kind leadership or just cultural implementation in other countries. What is there a big difference, or is it, like you said, it's just really similar and it's just a matter of adopting it to the actual culture?
So there's commonalities. There's core commonalities across the board. What you're looking for is the nuances. What is the cultural norm for how individuals have been taught to work in business, right? And I often use the example of Japan from a management perspective. Culturally, for decades across any type of business, being the manager, being the leader was to have all the answers. And so that makes it harder, not hard or impossible, but harder to make a cultural shift. And so it might take a little more time to say it's okay to get it wrong every now and then, because that is not what that culture really instilled. Right. So conversely, I'm not going to name countries, but there's other countries where being very blatant and like in your face right. Is very acceptable. And that doesn't necessarily foster creativity and growth as well. In fact, folks might shy away from it. So being culturally sensitive to the nuances of the change curve, if you will, for adoption, when you're moving from that know-it-all to learn-it-all, or allowing for more experimentation, or trying to create autonomy. I work with a lot of folks that are trying to empower their teams. And I was like, well, have you taught them to be autonomous? And they're like, yeah, we told them to be autonomous. And they're like, but have you taught them that they don't have to come for you? Or have you created an overdependent team that's always going to come to you for the answers? So there's geographic and national cultural that you have to look at, but there's also team dynamics of the culture. And I would say one of the greatest challenges when I was at Microsoft and in other companies such as Facebook and different areas that I've worked in is there's microcultures within the culture. And that's often driven by the leaders that are there. So what style do they have? That's actually more challenging on the global front because of the breadth of how many people are at play versus understanding what's happening in a specific country or a specific population. But again, it comes all down to the nuances of all of the above.
Thank you. Thank you for that. My background, I was born in South America, Peru, actually, and came to the States when I was 10, turning 11. So I pretty much grew up in the American culture. Didn't go back to Peru as much. And now as I'm running an IT company, we're expanding into Central and South America. And I've noticed that, yes, I speak the language. I can read it. For a long time, right, since I was a baby with my parents. But seeing some of the, like you're saying, some of the local, like even in the way people are, how you talk to people or how you interact from a business perspective in Central America, it's a little bit different in South America too. So it's how do you adapt? But at the end of the day, for me, to be honest, is the authenticity of what I bring to the table. Like when I come, meet new people, potential candidates, potential partners, I lay it all on the table. I was like, here's who I am. Here's what I would like to do. Here's how we all rise together. If you're interested in this, this is something that, people latch onto it, or some people still skeptical. It's like, who is this guy coming in and and then sharing everything, right? From kind of trying to create. And it throws people off because that's different than others, right? And this is what I want to kind of highlight. It's like with that growth mindset, being authentic is critical, right? The authenticity at work is one of the things I think you highlight, and we'll love your feedback and perspective on this.
Well, the A3 that I have stands and why I founded my company from a culture is based in authenticity, autonomy, and accountability. And the whole fake it till you make it, do the grind, just show up as a leader and you'll be leader. Yeah, that doesn't actually, people see through that, right? Yeah. And so, I am a big believer of what Brené Brown says, you don't have to overshare, but you do have to show up as a human that has flaws, has opportunities to learn, and own it. Does it get more important that you're consistent in how you show up as you move up in the ranks? Yes, because as the leader, you're setting that tone, you're setting a culture. But that authenticity and being consistently who you are and doing that sets the tone for everything else that's going on with your team. And if you're not being authentic, you're not really going to get autonomy. You're not going to get the accountability. And ultimately, then you're not going to get the innovation and business results that you're trying to achieve, because people don't know if they can trust you or not. And you've got to build trust. And if you're not authentic, that's where the whole being kind versus being nice, right? If you're often when we're being nice, we're putting on that persona
Right.
versus being empathetic in our authenticity and being able to problem solve and help people along is more sustainable.
Right. And for me, my challenge, with I'm authentic, every at least I believe so. Right? when when I go into conversations with folks, my challenge is as a leader running the company with the title of a CEO, there's a trust, right? Yeah, yeah. But how truthful, how genuine or authentic can I truly be to a leader like that? Maybe that the so I'm not expecting everybody to come in and share all their stories, but I want to create, and I am creating a platform. I'm asking out, the listeners or other leaders out there, right? As you're leading with kindness, right? It's not just about. I like to put away like titles, right? When it comes to either solving problems or getting into understanding your people, it's really about the people connection, being authentic, and I like what you're saying, accountable, right? Your 3 A's, right? It matters, right? It matters when you're connecting with the people at that level. Everything else, titles, experience, skill sets, doesn't matter. But if you're connecting with people and you help them and lead, and you're creating that impact in their lives in whatever way, shape, or form, whether it's an organizational impact for them in their work or even at home. Yeah, I got an issue going on at home, right? And you can be that, right? Doesn't mean you're becoming a therapist, right? And now you got to start people lining up in your door and providing that. But it's more about making that connection, being authentic, being vulnerable, and allowing yourself to show your peers or subordinates that you are human as well. You don't have all the answers, and we can all work together.
Yeah, and that comes in your daily presence. It's not just in like an all hands or an offsite, like these one big ta-da moments. And it's showing up in all the ways that you communicate, whether that is in the one-to-one conversation, you in a group meeting, an email tone that you're sending directly to an individual or to the organization. So the authenticity is based in that consistency. I think we'd be remiss to not acknowledge that when you're the owner of the company, you are inevitably in that power position because you do have business decisions to make. And, no one ever wants to have to change their business model or lay people off, but that is the reality of it. That doesn't mean that we don't do so without intention, empathy, and understanding. There is also a need in that authenticity. If you're having a bad day as a leader, your team's going to have a bad day. So having your safe space of where you can really unload versus how you show up a bit more even keeled with your organization and those around you, your energy and how you're showing up, they don't have the whole story necessarily, right? And so when you're having a bad day and you've had 100 great days or just consistent days, let's be realistic, and you come with a bad day, they start creating stories because that's what we as humans do. We fill in the blanks. If we don't know, what's going on with Gino today? Well, was he upset about this? Or they start like filling in the blanks. So while we can show up authentically, this is where I totally agree with Brene Brown. We don't have to overshare. And what's the filter, you may ask, for whether you're going to overshare or not? Is this going to drive clarity and generate the right energy that I need with my team? It's that intentionality of what am I sharing with them?
Yeah.
What level of transparency do they need to have? Will this create more worry for them right now? Is this something I might 3 months from now, 3 years from now, regret ever sharing? Those filters that we have as humans to begin with, but the ante's up when we're in leadership and in that power of employment position.
Yeah. No, well said. I mean, and I can give you an example real quick. Yesterday, it wasn't a good day for me, but I said something to one of my leaders through Teams, right? We chat and stuff like that. And I think it was interpreted a little bit differently, the way he interpreted that. And then I got to thinking, I was like, I may have been a little bit too direct. So I came back to him and I said, hey, by the way, not the best day. So sorry if I'm a little too short. I appreciate a little patience. That's all. And I think that helped, right? He understood where I was coming from, and that shifted the perspective where he was seeing, oh, this guy's coming down on me or something like that, right? It's more like, okay, all right, we'll give him a pass for this one, and let's, I'll be a little more patient. So that's where the authenticity and the vulnerability comes, right? Not oversharing. There's no need to details on what's going on in every single thing or every challenge that you're facing to your colleagues or peers, but it's let them know, right? It's not every day that, it's a good day, right? There's going to be, I see life as waves. There's some good days, some bad days, and then you just, those days that are bad is a learning day. I mean, it's a day to learn.
Absolutely. But the one thing I heard from you, Gino, there is you're owning it, right? I like to say that, when we have self-awareness and once it's been seen, it can't be unseen, unfortunately, or fortunately.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we're never going to slip.
Right.
But it's how we catch ourselves, how we hold ourselves accountable, and how we circle back to anyone we might have impacted with that slip.
Yeah.
That's the differentiator. That's where the authenticity and consistency comes back into play. And it makes us human in that aspect for those that we're connecting with.
Absolutely. So we talked about authenticity. We talked about accountability. So tell me a little more about autonomy on your third A there.
Well, see, with autonomy, this idea that we can work autonomous, which, when you're doing more with less with teams, getting that micromanaging oversight really can't be in play. They need to have confidence in themselves. They need to have your confidence in them if you're their leader. And they need to know the edge of the decision making that they're empowered to make. And then what happens, that growth mindset, when they get it wrong, right? And so we say, oh, you're empowered to do that. And we think culturally just stating that you're empowered does that. But for a lot of work environments, there's been a lot of oversight. We've traditionally in North America and many other countries had more of a command and control management style. And so this shift to autonomy or empowerment to make decisions on behalf of or owning your portion of the business. And we're seeing this in some major companies where they're getting rid of middle management. Bayer has done that recently. And they're changing it so that there's more ownership by each of the individual employees, and many other companies are doing this. Well, that ownership has to have the autonomy component, and people need to know how to act with autonomy, not just be told they have it.
Right. Okay, perfect. Now, thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, and maybe it's a separate conversation. What is AI and, going to do as it relates to autonomy? Because autonomy is about, being empowered, being able to make decisions, and being able to expand on that a little bit more from how we interact and how artificial intelligence is going to change the way we do business too, or, how culture is going to be impacted by that. But you just got me thinking about those as you were explaining.
Well, I want to add one thing in there, because I know in your day business that you work on Microsoft solutions. Yep. And I love the naming of Copilot.
Yep.
Because the way most of the research that is showing how AI should be incorporated in organizations is as a co-pilot, as a co-worker, as a co-resource. It's not just a tool, and it's not to replace.
Right.
It might replace certain functions to allow you to learn to do other functions.
Right.
And we are on the cusp as a society of learning how to get work done in a different way.
Yep.
I'm going to age myself again here, but I remember pre-internet, right? I actually, in college, worked for a typewriter company where you put paper in and whiteout. So, the internet changed everything. AI is changing everything. But what Microsoft is doing in the positioning of the word Copilot tells a lot about the intent. And it's another team resource. It's another aspect there. It's not replacing. You still have your accountability and your autonomy to manage through.
And I love the naming because for multiple reasons. Personally, not only from a technology perspective, I'm also a pilot, right? So I've used, we have autopilot, but it's like, my co-pilot, I use it, right? It's a technology that, has improved the flying capabilities for a lot of pilots and reduced the fatalities, essentially, or the accidents, because now you can focus on other things that are more important. Let that autopilot or co-pilot kind of just drive, right? Fly the plane. And now my responsibility is now monitoring, checking to see, making sure he or she, they're going in the right direction, right? And then also I can just get better and better as we continue to navigate through not only the flying, but also on the technical side, right? To your point, it's like with co-pilot, we're working together, to build that out. So, but yeah, appreciate the connection there on the technology side. So one last thing is before we start kind of closing out here, you have a program called Mindset Maven that's coming out early next year. You mind sharing with our audience what that is all about?
Sure. First and foremost, I really am looking to find simple and effective methods to transform how we're showing up in day to day. And it's based on some of my own health challenges. I've had a lot of micro stresses and some impact for that. And I have learned that I can increase my energy and boost my productivity and have better confidence. And confidence isn't just something that you gain once and then you get confidence for life. Every new situation, everything that we're going through is an opportunity for us to build more confidence, because we were confident in what we did before, but what we're doing now won't necessarily get us to the next thing.
Right.
And so I've spent a lot of time working with a variety of different partners in understanding neuroplasticity and energy management and the mind-body connection to our mindset. We actually have 3 brains. We have neurons in our thinking brain, our heart, and our gut. And that's a conversation for a whole nother day. But really exploring emotions and emotions in the workplace, and the idea that emotions can get away from us. And this is where that inconsistency and the bad days can be occurring. So with Mindset Maven, we really are looking at understanding and harnessing the mind-body connection to really maintain peak energy levels, not getting drained by the end of the day, so we can be vibrant and really have a focused, thoughtful day. And tools for really boosting productivity. Some of that is AI and other things that can be our co-pilots in life. And last but not least, that unshakable confidence that gives us more resilience. With so many of my coaching clients that I've worked with in all walks of life, resilience, especially coming out of the pandemic and everything else that's happened in the world, is a challenge. So with Mindset Maven, we're putting together a program so that we can really address those 3 areas.
Nice.
So that we can have a little bit less stress in the world, if you will.
Yeah, I love it. I love how you describe the energy, optimizing your energy. Because we're all, energy, right? That we are. And interesting. I like listening to many books, and there was a quote there, like, energy can't be destroyed or created. I think it was just can't be but you can shift energy, right? So from a mindset and energy of being in a state of anger or sadness, if you center yourself, or, you can shift that energy to be a more positive way, right? So I love how you're connecting that program. I would love to learn more about that later. That will help, if you start with the energy, and then you can definitely increase or boost your productivity and build that confidence. But it comes from centering, bringing that inside and feeling that, right? So,
and it comes from that authenticity and the good day, bad day, right? It's the energy that we're translating to people. You can, here in North America, we say we can get a vibe, right? It's this aspect when the leader walks in the room, if they're really uptight, there's a physicality to that.
Yep.
And people start making stories. Oh, he's in a bad mood, or hide under the desk. So this is really understanding that it's more the way than what we say.
Yep.
That impacts how people feel in their interactions with us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Andrea, for that. And one of the last questions I'd like to ask is, if you could have coffee with anyone alive or from the past, who would it be and why?
Albert Einstein. And you said that you were to ask me this question, and that wasn't the name that came up, but Albert Einstein, he was a dyslexic, and which is 20% of the world's population. And so just the way his brain looked at the world would be fascinating to me. And he also, from everything that I've read, seems like he was quite the character. But just that different perspective and the different way to get curious about the world around us would be an interesting discussion over coffee.
Absolutely. I would love to join as well. But thank you for sharing there. So where can our listeners connect with you?
They can connect with me on LinkedIn, and you can also go to mindsetmaven.com to learn more about the new program that's coming out in early 2025.
Awesome. Super excited to learn more about that in 2025. Any final thoughts that you have for me or for our guests?
I would say that be bold in being kind, that being kind over being nice is a better service to you and those around you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you for joining us today. We had a great conversation and got to learn a little more about you as well as your new programs, and then just really enjoyed it. So thank you for participating, and I look forward to future sessions maybe.
Thank you, Gino. It's been so much fun just having a conversation with someone who's exploring this important topic. So thank you.
You're welcome. So thank you, everybody. And I appreciate you listening. And with that, I'll leave you with be kind, bring value, rise together. Have an amazing day.